one challenge at a time. Omdena takes a bottom-up collaborative AI development approach where a global community of change makers come together to build an ethical and efficient AI solution to some of the most pressing problems in the world. And it is applicable for NGOs, for social enterprises, and impact-driven startups. Since the inception of the organization, collaborators have worked on over 50 high-impact projects with over 1,800 collaborators tackling problems such as energy management, climate change, sexual harassment, natural disasters, and many, many more. We use the collective intelligence and expertise of people from across the world to drive these solutions. Our local Texas chapter was founded in April of 2020 with the mission of promoting AI for good through providing case studies and education to local AI enthusiasts and businesses around the world. Some of the benefits that members of our local chapters receive include, number one, education through real-world case studies. Number two, networking opportunities. And number three, making a local impact through initiatives that we organize. So who are our people? So this is just a quick snapshot of the kinds of people from all walks of life that come together to come up with these solutions. So we have machine learning engineers, we have data scientists, we have domain experts, etc. So it's a very, very collaborative platform. Here are some use cases from prior Omdena challenges. So the first one on the left is basically using AI to improve the aftermath management of an earthquake in Europe. The second one on the right is applying deep learning to detect wildfires in Brazil. And the third one is personal to me because I was in Chicago for a few years, and we used AI to prevent gang and gun violence via social media analysis. So really fascinating case studies, real world use cases, and just so much potential for AI solutions that we can use and apply in our daily lives. So the one at the bottom, the Chicago gun violence, it's very fascinating. What we did was we took the Twitter messages of people in the community, some of who were gang members, looked for specific keywords, did some topic modeling using AI. We came up with some predictions as to when the next gang violence might happen. And we were able to accurately predict using AI when it will happen. And we took it to the police and they are using it at the moment. They're using the work that Omdena had done through this collaboration. So really fascinating studies and use cases. So, okay, focus area for the Texas chapter. Most of you might know that Texas is the second largest state in the US by population and area, close to 30 million people, and plenty of opportunities for accelerating progress by leveraging the latest technology solutions. The focus for the Texas chapter of Omdena is in 5 key areas. Number one is energy. How can AI help with the management of energy? For example, how can machine learning drive the adoption of solar energy? Agriculture, how can we help improve food security and crop yields in Texas through machine learning? Number 3, disaster management. Texas witnessed a deep freeze event. I'm sure a lot of you from Texas have lived through it, and I'm still living through it because my house got flooded with water, so we are having to stay elsewhere. But from a disaster management standpoint, we can do so many things better using AI. Number 4, safety, rating road safety through machine learning to prevent road accidents. That's a big thing. And human rights, number 5, identifying and monitoring human rights abuses through NLP language models. So that will be the focus areas for the Texas chapter. And we will have a lot more events going forward in the coming months that will focus on specific use cases and case studies that we can use in the state of Texas in our own communities. So having said that, let's move to the topic of the day, right? So this is a snapshot of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure many of you have seen it or heard about it. Today, we'll focus on two specific ones, which are directly related to the topic of the day, which is AI and energy. What we'll talk about is SDG number 7 and SDG number 13. So SDG number 7 is basically ensuring access for reliable, affordable, and sustainable clean energy for all. And number 13 is about taking urgent action to combat climate change and looking at its impacts. So a lot of the discussion today will be focused on these two. And let's just get a real quick overview of something that came in the New York Times just in the last 24 hours. So this is an example of the direct implication of the SDGs, right? So this is a graph of the trajectories for the world's largest emitters. Energy, pollution, everything is related. So you see in the US, President Biden has taken a pledge that by 2020, there's going to be a big reduction in the amount of CO2 emissions. So, okay. And obviously in the other countries as well, there's a huge focus on reduction of CO2. Okay, so let's go to the topic of the day, which is energy. So Umar Khan will be talking about energy overview, talking about the different renewable sources of energy. Over to you, Umar. You're speaking on mute.
That's probably better, isn't it? Okay. Hey guys, this is Omar. Today I'm going to talk about just a quick overview of the US energy market and the different energy sources that we use to generate electricity in US, Texas, and some of the largest electricity producers in the country. So if we go over to my first slide. Here we have an overview of the US energy market. Currently, the US is getting about 20% of its electricity from renewable sources like wind, solar, and hydro. Natural gas remains the largest source of energy when it comes to electricity production. But we still have a significant amount that comes from coal and nuclear. Naturally, we would like to reduce that as much as we possibly can. And then, so now if we go to the next slide, we're going to see sort of how it breaks down across different states. In this chart, what we're looking at is what percent of each region's electricity comes from what energy source. The first bar is the US. You see the same sort of figures that we saw before. And if we look at Texas, what we see is Texas is getting about 20% of its power from wind. Which is pretty good. It's more than twice what the national average is. And overall, Texas is getting about 23% of its electricity from renewable sources, which is slightly higher than the US as a whole. And Texas also has it gets more of its electricity from wind than most other states, with the exception of Iowa, which gets about 57% of its electricity from wind. But we need to sort of look at those figures in context, which we will in a minute. But then if we look at California is leading the way when it comes to solar, though, and they're getting about a quarter of their power from solar. And I think that's an area where Texas really needs to catch up and do better. We're going to look at that in detail in a minute as well. So then if we go over to the next slide. So here we're looking at electricity in terms of, absolute amounts. We're looking at, hundreds of thousands of megawatt hours produced. And if you look at this chart, you see that, even though Texas is only getting 20% of its wind from 20% of its electricity from wind, it's generating more wind power, more energy from wind power than any other state. That's in terms of absolute, it's almost 100,000 megawatt hours, and that's really good. In fact, Texas is getting more electricity from wind than California is getting from all of its renewable sources combined. So in absolute figures, Texas is leading the way when it comes to renewables. If we take a look at Iowa for a second, even though Iowa is getting the majority of its electricity from wind, it's not producing a lot of electricity, in total. So, putting those figures in context, we see that Texas is really doing really great when it comes to wind power. If we look at the next slide, here we see total electricity generated from wind over time. We see that, after 2005, it starts going up significantly. Again, the blue line is the US, the red line is Texas. And you can see again that, Texas has been leading the way in wind almost from the very start. And it's currently producing most of the electricity from wind power in the US, more than any other state, head and shoulders above any other state. And one of the things we noticed is that in 2015, that rate accelerates even faster. 2015 is a year when SDG 7 was adopted. So Texas and the US in general are making strides to, comply with and bring themselves up to the ideals that are set by SDG 7. So now let's go over to the next slide and take a look at wind in the US. So this map is showing us the potential wind energy that can be harnessed across the US. The regions that are dark brown are regions where there's not a lot of potential for wind energy. And the regions that are lighter blue and lighter brown are areas where there is a lot of potential for wind energy. This region here, you see, it's the Great Plains region. It's very windy, and one reason for that is because the Great Plains is just a flat expanse of land that goes all the way up into Canada and almost into the Arctic. So it allows for cold Arctic air to come whooshing down very quickly. One of the things about the North American continent is that it has no east-west mountain ranges. And instead we have the Great Plains, which serve as a highway straight to the Arctic, allowing cold air to come in. It's one of the reasons why we have a lot of adverse weather events in the US. This region of the Great Plains where you have a lot of wind is also known as Tornado Alley. It is the most active tornado region in the world, partly because of that very reason. Easy cold air coming whooshing down into the warmer climates, and when cold and warm air mix, bad things happen. It's also why we got that polar freeze in Texas a couple of months ago. And so if we go to the next slide, here we're seeing the location of different wind farms in the country, and as you would expect, they're mostly concentrated in regions that are sort of, have more wind speed on average. And we can see that, in Texas, most of the wind generation capacity is installed in the Texas Panhandle around the Amarillo area, where, that's where the Great Plains region sort of touches Texas, and that's where we have a lot of wind. And then Iowa, you can see here, is kind of on the edge of that region as well and has a lot of wind farms. I know you're probably wondering, well, it looks like there's a whole bunch of area here where we could install more wind capacity because it has a lot of potential, and that's true. The downside is that this is South Dakota, North Dakota. These are very sparsely populated areas, and they're pretty far from major electricity markets, about as far as you could get because it's right in the middle of the country. And one thing you have to consider when it comes to wind power is transmission loss over long distances, which is why you see that, there's been a lot of capacity developed in Iowa, mainly because it can get plugged right into the Midwest markets of Chicago, Wisconsin, Detroit, and Texas. Again, you have all the electricity here. It can quickly be sent to Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and, the whole Texas metropolitan area. So if we go over to the next chart, one of the beautiful things that's been happening lately is that the cost of producing solar power has been declining very, very rapidly. And you see that now it's almost less than, $50 per gigawatt installed. And that's per megawatt hour installed. And I think that bodes really well And I think that that means that, we're hopefully going to be seeing more solar in the future. I think if you think about the implications of that, I think very soon we would even be seeing more electricity generation across the globe from solar, because it's easy to sort of set up if the panels are cheap enough. It's not very capital intensive. You don't need a lot of big facilities. So you could just start dropping solar panels into remote villages in parts of the world that doesn't have access to electricity, and they can start powering themselves up. So that's good news. But let's talk about solar in the US. If we go to the next slide, here we're going to see similar to what we saw before with wind energy potential. Here we're seeing solar energy potential. And the darker the area, the more solar energy. I think the metric is megawatts per meter squared. And as you would expect, you're seeing a lot of potential for solar right now here near the border. Those are desert regions. That's the Chihuahuan, Sonoran, and the Mojave deserts. Deserts get a lot of sunshine, a lot of clouds, so they're really great places for installing solar power generation facilities. And we see that California has a lot of such high solar potential areas, and that may be one reason why they're really far ahead in the solar race. But Texas has deserts. We have deserts here just as much as the next guy. And we have plenty of solar potential. That's not, it doesn't have to be, desert scale, but it's still pretty good. But if we go to the next slide, and as we saw in our charts before, Texas does not have a lot of solar power generation at the moment. I'm confident that will change. You see California is just dense with solar power facilities, and Texas has a few. But once we get into solar, we're going to do it bigger than anybody else, because everything's bigger in Texas, and solar will be too. So now I want to take a minute to, if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about the concern that a lot of people had, especially after the recent severe weather event we had in Texas with the cold weather and the loss of power. And there was a concern raised about renewables being susceptible to adverse weather events and not being as reliable as conventional energy sources. But the fact is, if we look at that particular incident, renewables only contributed to 13% of the power outages, even though they were providing a quarter of the state's energy. So they contributed less to the power outages proportionate to like how much they actually contribute. Thermal, coal, gas, and nuclear lost almost twice as many gigawatts of power because of the cold. And critics have noted that wind turbines can operate in places like Greenland, which is virtually Arctic, as long as they're properly prepared for the weather. So the thing to remember is that the power outages that we got in Texas had more to do with the fact that Texas is not a state that experiences that kind of weather very frequently. So our power facilities were not outfitted to handle those kinds of events, and that was really more the reason why. And there's also discussion about whether they should be retrofitted in that way, and that's just Texas has made the decision that it's not really feasible.
And I think 12 division 1 code is either a town or a city or a
Um,
province, and then the whole address. You don't need to go.
okay,
Do we want to go all address?
Particularly speaking, can everyone mute yourselves?
I got it.
Thank you. Go.
So yeah, so we shouldn't be quick to throw renewables under the bus, and they may in fact even be more reliable energy sources than conventional sources. And that's all from my end, and I will pass it back to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Umar. Thank you for that insightful overview of the energy industry in Texas and US in general. It's pretty fascinating to see how wind energy is so big here in Texas. So Texas is leading in wind. I'm sure we will have Texas lead in solar as well if we, if we adopt the right solutions using AI. So yeah, as you said, everything is big in Texas. So let's make sure that renewable energies are as well going forward. Thank you once again, Umar. Next, we have an amazing speaker, Jody Frank. who will speak about using some powerful AI techniques to interpret the energy transition and implementation. So with you, I'll pass it to Joe. With that, I'll pass it to Jody.
All right, thank you, Kaushik. So to move things along, so this is basically the introduction to an Omdena project that we did back in March of 2020 last year. The official title is using NLP and sentiment analysis to better interpret and implement energy transition, but that basically sums up to humanizing energy transition. So basically, with the advent of renewable energy sources, the implementation of them has been a global contention between policymakers, politicians, companies, and basically society as a whole. So with each year, the technology behind renewables have gone through massive changes, but obviously there needs to be much more done in the incoming decades. And really the main purpose of this project of humanizing energy transition was to see how the average person felt about these changes with these energy sources through numerous sources such as Twitter, Reddit, and so on and so forth. And I do want to say we did partner with the Energy Council on this project as well. So let's move on to the next slide to address the problem at hand. All right, so really the main issue is the lack of social interpretation, right? So we want to see how the average person feels about like renewable energies as a whole. Like, of course, we could go on to the news and watch CNN or BBC or some type of news site to get like a two sides, maybe a third dimension to that. But with the advent of social media, we have all of these multiple data sources. So not just relying on news articles, but relying on social media websites such as Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and so on. So what can we do with all this data? So we were basically facing multiple challenges, so multiple data sources, incomplete information from some sources. Also, how do we account for biases? So one thing that we really found out is that a lot of these sources, but especially on social media, they're pretty much geared towards the Western world and really geared towards America for the most part, but I'll address that further on. And what role do citizens play, as well as any language barriers and finances? And basically, how can we analyze all of this information? Sorry. So let's move on to the next slide about purpose and motivation. So just to hark on back to what Kaushik was pointing to earlier with the SDG goals, he really shown on number 7 and I believe number 13 with regards to affordable and clean energy as well as climate action. And we definitely want to try to see how does the public would some of these goals as well as climate action as a whole. So there's a shift in support for alternatives, which will require some social upheaval and greater understanding amongst populations, as well as consumers and individuals vote with their wallets and must be educated on the merits and demerits of each strategy. And thus, it's imperative to interpret social sentiments with regarding to existing and emerging sources, as well as technologies globally. And as established earlier from Kaushik, data is truly the fuel that could facilitate a better decision-making system for environmentalists and policymakers. So as Kaushik mentioned earlier, Andrew Ng, one of the godfathers of AI, mentioned that data is really the new oil. And with the advent of all of these machine learning technologies, that sentiment really cannot be understated here, especially for this project. So let's move on to the problem scope in the next slide. So let's address what's being studied here. So as I mentioned earlier, we were really looking at different social media websites such as Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. There's also the Chinese social media website Weibo. And we're also looking at news websites such as the Huffington Post, Reuters, Bloomberg, and so on and so forth, as well as any type of looking into any developing and developing nations, including those poised to be global superpowers, so such as the US, China, India, Nigeria, Europe, and so on and so forth. And we could also establish who's going to benefit from a project like this. So policymakers, economists, government stakeholders, and environmentalists, as well as consumers, taxpayers, and society as a whole. So let's move on to the ultimate goal for this project in the next slide. All right, so let's establish some of the objectives. So we first needed to list all of the data sources from social media sources, forums, news articles, and surveys related to energy and energy transition, analyze and break down the data in order to remove noise, as well as create visualizations, which you'll guys see in a couple of moments, in order to help understand the social sentiments across nations, societies for various issues, including energy prices and comfortability to switch to sources. And what we've achieved so far, we're cleaning up the data sets with proper labeling from various media sources, interpretable sentiment analysis visualizations for specific keywords and phrases, highly accurate AI models to predict and classify text, as well as automation code to collect and scrape, as well as analyze text data from social media and other sources as well. So let's move on to some of the visualizations. So first things first, we have this word cloud that we were able to basically visualize through the basically creating a bigram and n-gram model algorithms, and we basically pulled this all of these words basically and phrases and sentences from Twitter mainly. So as you can see with India, the biggest keyword that, or phrase I should say, that you see being being the standout phrase is renewable energy. Same for Nigeria, but also affordable prices as well. For the UK, renewable energy is somewhat standing out here, but as you can see, there are other things sticking out as well. So prices, climate change, fossil fuels, and so on. And for the USA, again, renewable energy does stick out there, but also alike with the UK, fossil fuels, climate change, clean energy, and so on and so forth. So there is like a clear relationship here. All of the countries that we basically analyzed, they are pretty much falling into that, the concern about the renewable energy. But I will say this, that because a lot of the social media websites, which I established earlier, are very US based, for India and Nigeria, that might not be the full picture, as we're only to, for this word cloud alone, we were only able to pull out of Twitter. So there is like a huge bias towards the Western world. So that's why we were able to pull out a lot more information from there. And to move on to the next visualization, here we have a little bit of sentiment analysis or text classification between US-based and non-US based tweets. So as you can see here, so the two classes that we were classifying for with a pre-trained BERT model was for against and in favor of renewable energy sources. So from the US-based tweets, it was 55% against, 45% in favor. Not so sure exactly what to say about that from a moral standpoint. Again, you know, there's always a bias towards certain people, like certain like tweets that you would see on Twitter. So we do have to account for all these all of these biases in the data. However, from the non-US based tweets, I believe like we were pulling from multiple sources outside of the US. So I believe the UK, India, and Nigeria, 34% against, 66 percent in favor. Again, because because Twitter is such a US-based platform, there is a sort of a bias here. So again, this is not exactly telling the full story, but this does give us a snapshot about how people who live in the US feel before compared to non-US folks who live in other countries. So to move on to the last slide, let's establish what we've done presently and what's the roads afar. So basically, we have a repository of information about social sentiments from different countries, websites, and languages. The sentiment analysis results for sources other than English, Spanish, and Chinese, so including Mandarin and Cantonese. We were able to do some translation with non-English languages. Also, we addressed the current generated models for topic synthesis and predictions are well adjusted to dissect information obtained from new social media resources. So one of the models that I didn't really touch upon is that we were able to use a lot of topic modeling in order to get to basically see what are like the top 25 or so keywords from all of these sources as well. So we were able to use LDA, LSI, latent semantic indexing for the topic modeling portion of our project here. And we're also using ensemble methods such as linear support vector models, which are better at connecting sentiments to context. And just to address, social media is truly a rich resource to tap into and understand what people are talking about. And the social perceptions about energy bills, energy use, screen energy, and more topics vary depending on online anonymity and platform culture. Reddit and Facebook are definitely preferred choices for social sentiment analysis over Twitter, as well as sentiment analysis just needs to be expanded upon beyond text. So I'm sure, you know, if you just spend one day on the internet, a lot of people react through GIFs and memes and other types of pictures, images, etc. So we were mainly pretty much focused on text data, but it can be expanded towards non-text data as well. And that is basically the summary of the entire project. I cannot wait to hear from you guys during the Q&A portion to ask any more questions about this project as well. But thank you.
Thank you, Jody, for helping decipher the energy transition through n-grams and topic modeling and BERT models. So really appreciate it. Next, let's hear from Kaushal Bhavsar about driving the adoption of solar energy using machine learning. Over to you, Kaushal.
Yeah. Hi. There has been a project in Omdena where we, so can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, where we helped a partner organization called Solar AI to use machine learning models to detect rooftops or solar potential over Singapore's island area. So if you move to the next slide. So Omar has already told you a lot about what's the position of solar energy in USA, but to put a more perspective to it, like solar power installations is 23 times higher in US than 8 years ago. So essentially, we can see that we are moving towards solar AI, but the problem that we can see here is that when you look at the map Omar showed you, you can see there are a lot of wind farms spread across US where the actual wind potential is very low. But when you look at the solar potential of the US, it's very high compared to how many solar farms are there across the whole map. I'm going to tell you what's the problem in the next slide, but so can you move back to previous slides? Yeah, sorry. So, now, talking about solar energy, it's the only form of renewable energy which is accessible by individual all across the world. Um, when we talk about wind energy or hydropower or other forms of renewable energy, it's very hard to actually tap into it as an individual level. So if you are actually willing to make a change and move towards renewable energy, solar energy is the way to go. And if you don't know already about it, a lot of governments, especially in US, they provide you a lot of tax benefits, as well as you can also send back excess solar energy that you have created to again back to the grid, the local grid you have, to generate more income out of it. So actually, solar energy is very good when you compare to other renewable energies. But still, we can see that there are not a lot of solar panels you can see around. And if you go to the next slide, please. And the problem here is, yeah. So the problem here is the solar panel installers. So when you look at a solar panel installers, they target the industrial sector of solar panels because that's where they have the highest profit margin, right? And when you look at from an individual's perspective, people are really very uneducated about solar energy because it's relatively the newest form of renewable energy known to mankind. So individuals do not have proper knowledge on how to install solar panels or how much return it can give you compared to other traditional form of energies like gas or the electricity which you get from your grid. Um, and from the solar panel installers, moving to a smaller individual house, they have a smaller profit margin. So they really don't want to look into that market. So if you look from a solar panels a panel installer's perspective, they have to actually come to your house and look at your rooftop and give you estimate on how much solar panels will you require and how much it will cost you, which makes about 30 to 40% of the whole entire solar panel installation process. And as a consequences of such hindrance, again, the solar panel installer does not look any projects which are lesser than 500 kilowatts of energy. Um, for a particular project. So this is where we come in. This is where Omdena and Solar AI came in. Next slide, please. So this is where we created a machine learning model where we can fill this gap where the solar panel installer does not have to go individually to each and every house um, to actually detect the roof area and how much it will cost. We do that for them using the satellite images we have available. So this project was specifically focused on Singapore's area, but this is true for every other area, every other, like for example, US, Texas, as well as India and Singapore. So what we did was create a model where we detect building outlines. We detect the type of roof it is because that also depends how much solar panel you can fit into in top of that. Like for example, is it flat or is it tilted? We estimated the direction of the slope if the surface is not flat, because if it's facing, if you're living in a southern hemisphere and it's facing north, it has better panel capacity, solar potential than rooftop facing south. We would also classify roof material, whether it is metal, roof tiles, or concrete. We detect the obstacles because generally you cannot put a solar panel on top of air vents or a chimney or stuff like that. And we detected the whole area as well as the material as well as the type and give you a solar panel solar installation estimate right on time. So that was our whole project. Next. So we gathered 52 collaborators as standard Omdena project goes, standard Omdena projects goes. We 52 collaborators from 21 different countries gathered around. We worked on a pipeline, created, trained, and tested within 8 weeks. And we delivered a final output with containing rooftop features fulfilling Solar AI's requirement. And Solar AI was the partner organization, if I haven't already mentioned. Next. So how we did it? So basically, we got a satellite imagery of Singapore's island from Solar AI. We did some pre-processing over it where we used sliding window technique to gather all the data from around the satellite because it's very huge area. So we gathered small localized area out of it. We did annotations because generally that's how we go around a machine learning model, where we tell the machine what we are looking for. After that, we did some rooftop detection where we detected the outlines of rooftop, we detected obstacles, material, and the roof face, as well as the orientation of roof face, and then we delivered the final data. Next slide. So we get all the, this is how the satellite images look like. This is actually a very good resolution of 0.7 meter. We use sliding window technique. So we divided all the whole satellite into small subtiles, and we detected slides which have buildings inside it, and that buildings we use it to annotate. We created a data set of 2000 plus tiles. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is how we annotated each and every roof building. It was a huge task, and we had like 20-30 people working on it day and night. We tagged each and every building as well as the roof faces inside it. We also used OpenStreetMap data and other open source available data as well. Next. So yeah, this is how it looks like. We created like 600 to 700 images of all the buildings. To give you a perspective, we have 2000 plus tiles of different of the satellite images, and each and every tile contained like 400 or 500 buildings. So you can calculate how many buildings were there that we annotated. So next slide, please. So yeah, so this is how the very first model goes on. We try to detect the mask, or basically the outlines of the rooftop, and calculated the type of the rooftop as well. So if you squint a little bit, you can see there is a mask over top of each building, and you can see the probability as well as the type there. So there is a flat, hip, and shed roof. So flat is flat, a hip is tilted on both sides, and shed is tilted on one side. And it gave us pretty good results. We tried different machine learning models as Muscastin and Detectron 2 and Yolact. Next. And we also did some obstacle detection using clustering methods, because generally if you want to annotate obstacles over top of a building, it's a very tedious process. So we moved to unsupervised machine learning process where we cluster the colors and then we calculate the obstacle. So this was pretty clever from Omdena's side, where we did not use any data, which is like 80% of the machine learning process. So we did not use any prerequisite data. We just moved on and did some unsupervised methods. Next. So we also classified the building's rooftop material with using VGG19 model. Next, please. And finally, we moved on to calculate the orientation of the rooftop. As I mentioned, the orientation plays a major role in how much solar panel or solar potential there is on a rooftop. So again, this is very hard to annotate. So for what we did was to calculate the edges, and we then calculated the direction of the edge based on the horizontal and the vertical axis. And this is also we have done using unsupervised machine learning algorithms and pixel calculations. So this is one of another thing which we actually created our own during the tenure of the project. Next slide, please. And it all comes together for the final project objectives, where we have an input where we have satellite images as an input, and final deliverable output where it's an end-to-end working pipeline. So I've been working. So after the project ended, I've been working with Solar AI continuously to actually improve the project. Right now, we have a model where you type in your address, and we would go to that address, and using satellite images again, we would calculate the solar potential of your rooftop, and we can tell you how much it will cost you, as well as how much time it will take you to get a return on investment, how much time or years it will take you. So let's say if you have a 400 square meter space, it would take around 6 to 7 years to get return on your investment. After that, it will be a profit for you. Next slide, please. Yeah. So yeah, that's that's all about it. That's the whole project, and any questions will be welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kaushal. Really amazing insights and putting it into real world applications from an AI standpoint with practical, ROI implications. So thank you all the speakers for your insights and walking us through your case studies and use cases. So next, let's touch briefly on, how Texas can play a key role in using AI for sustainability and related projects. So the same 5 focus areas that we talked about earlier at the beginning of the presentation. So number 1 in energy, think about how can we use computer vision to improve energy sustainability and drive towards the national pledge metrics and goals from UN. From an agriculture standpoint, how can we improve the yields in agriculture for the various crops? From a disaster management standpoint, how could AI have helped the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, as many of us know, which is the state's grids manager, to better understand and predict the potential impact of severe weather events like the one that happened just 2 months ago. From a safety standpoint, think about using machine learning for improving transportation and congestion, in the various cities in Texas, right? Houston, it's pretty big, lots of traffic issues. The same case with Austin now, and Dallas, with so much explosion going on in terms of population moving into Texas from other parts of the United States. And finally, human rights, using natural language processing models for improving human rights conditions in Texas. So tons of potential where each of us can have an impact in the state of Texas, leveraging solutions that have been potentially built elsewhere in the world. So the next slide is just a few things as to why you should be involved with Omdena. Number 1 is the Omdena platform, the organization, gives you a very unique ability to participate in real world AI challenges using real world data sets and coming up with the right solutions to make a direct impact in the community. Number 2, it gives you an opportunity to be a part of so many things. We have something called the AI Writers Academy, where you can be an influencer depending on the article that you publish. Number 3 is you can network with other like-minded data scientists and machine learning engineers and domain experts from across the world. So lots of great benefits and advantages being a part of this amazing collaborative community. Where can you find more information about us, about Omdena? You can check out our blog, www.omdena.com/blog. You can follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram. And obviously the website omdena.com gives you lots of information as well. So that brings us to Q&A. We can open it up to Q&A for the next 5 minutes or so. So if anyone has any question, feel free to jump in, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, sir. Hi there.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Stephen Contreras. I'm a software and machine learning engineer. And climate change and using AI to do something about it very much interests me, though I have no practical experience so far. So my question is, do you foresee a role for autonomous agents or robotics in AI for clean energy using techniques such as GANs, competitive gradient descent? You mentioned computer vision already, but computational perception in general? And if so, how do you foresee that playing out?
Yeah, great question, Stephen. Thank you for asking the question. And it's open to any of the panelists, but I'll take a first cut at it. As you know, GANs, it's still evolving, right? We are, in the very nascent stages of development. We absolutely see that there's a huge potential by using some of these models. And we are working with collaborators who have used GANs in some of our challenges and some of our projects. So if you're, up for a discussion, you can contact us, and then we can take that forward. But yes, in the energy industry, we absolutely see a need for the cutting edge solutions that we are seeing related to GANs, etc.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I have another question. So my name is Deva, and I am an energy engineer working in the building energy efficiency field, and I am a current student of machine learning. So I'm curious about the upcoming recommendation engine for energy efficiency in buildings project. Could you maybe share a little bit about what the data looks like and how NLP would help achieve the end goals mentioned on the website?
Absolutely, Reva. Thanks for that question. We do have a lot of information on the website, specifically on these different categories. So for energy, we have a special focus on energy projects. So if you go to the website, you will be able to take a look at the information that we have from a data set standpoint. I mean, obviously, some of it is private, the information that you'll find online is based on the problem statement and the solution that Omdena collaborators have come up with. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us, at a future date.
Sure, thank you. I actually just wanted to know a little more about the upcoming one that you mentioned in the beginning, the recommendation engine in building energy efficiency. So yeah. Can I see that as well on the website, like what the data might look like? Or
so that's something that's coming up. That's going to basically kick off on April 29th. So next Thursday is when we are going to talk to the people that are working on it and come together as a community and build a solution, for the partner. So we are still, a week ahead, but the results will be published as soon as we are done in 2 months' time.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Reva.
Hi, my name is Rudra Sarangi. I'm an associate scientist working at UT Austin. I have a question specifically for Jordi.
Rudra, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you speak up a little? We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, this is much better. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm an associate research scientist at UT Austin, and I had a question specifically for Jordi. So I was curious for the NLP project when she did Twitter sentiment analysis. Was the data normalized to the fraction of population in the country who are on Twitter? Because for countries like India, where a large majority of population is not on Twitter, there's likely to be a bias on the Twitter users to, prefer sustainable energy versus in the US, where you probably see a better representation of like the overall population. So would that skew the results one way or the other?
Yes. Oh, yes, Rudra. I believe I mentioned that during the presentation as well. Like there's just a huge Western bias, but specifically American bias for a lot of these social media websites. But because, Twitter has such a great API for like these type of things in terms of like getting all the text necessary, as well as like Reddit, YouTube, we basically really just decided on like the big like 5 or 3 or so, but we could have definitely went to other websites if we were given the chance. The average Omdena project, I believe, is only 8 weeks long, and unfortunately we just don't have like enough time to like go through like multiple resources. So definitely just overall, there was just like a huge Western bias in general for most of the sources that we got to. But that's like a really great question. I'm not so sure if we did like scale it towards like the population on Twitter, or like at least like the population of tweets that we found from other countries. I would just say in general, definitely, like if we were to like make this like a longer scale project for sure, like we would have like went through like way more sources outside of the sources that we went to. But that's a really great question. But yeah, just in general, for the most part, like it was just like a huge Western bias. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Rudra, for asking, and thank you, Jody, for answering that. Just in the interest of time, we are on top of the hour. We don't want to go over, but thank you for all the amazing questions. You can follow up with us on, on email, contact@omdena.com, and we will have a series of events coming up once a month in the Texas chapter. So you are, you are most welcome to join those as well. And secondly, I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. We'll send you a feedback form in the next 24 hours. We really appreciate if you can fill it up. It'll take you less than a minute to fill it up. So really appreciate your time. And last but not the least, since today is Earth Day, so make sure you conserve some electricity, water, and we look forward to, seeing you again next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys.